I'm on a quest to uncover the secrets to crafting the perfect SaaS website. In each episode, I talk with product marketing professionals, sharing their hot takes on the future of B2B websites, as well as tactical breakdowns on how to better understand your customers and activate buyers faster. Today, I'm joined by Anthony Pieri, a product marketer who has grown a large audience on LinkedIn over the last 2 years due to his tactical frameworks and sometimes spicy takes on this episode's topic, which is product positioning. Anthony takes us through his new framework, which helps B2B startups differentiate themselves and develop clear, easy to understand product positioning, even when in crowded product categories. Let's jump in. Okay, Anthony, so you've just started working with a new startup. They've done their customer research, their jobs to be done research. What is the first step in developing their position? What would you guys take them through?
Yeah. So the first thing we do before we actually get to any of the meat and potatoes of like making decisions, we try to explain to them our model. And they've seen bits and pieces of this from our LinkedIn posts if they've been following us. But we always try to get people so we're all using the same vernacular to understand these things. So it may even be helpful. I could just share my screen and even just taking something like positioning and defining it. So for us, positioning is really three different things. And if you want to put it into equation, we would say positioning is a combination of segmentation, categorization, and differentiation. Effectively answering three questions. Who is your product for? What is it? And why is it better than what they're using today? If you can get those three things dialed in, you have effectively tried to earn a spot in their brain. You've created mental availability. If you think of their brain as a bunch of shelves at the grocery store with different types of products or different types of food, you've told them exactly where your product lives, in which shelf, in which part of the store, so they have a mental framework of understanding what it is, when they would buy it, the value that it offers. And ideally, within the shelf it's sitting on, you're also explaining, here's why we're different than the other things on the shelf, right? And there's all different ways that you can do this. So those are the three things you have to get right. And they are loosely constituted by these 5 different elements. We would call this a workflow, or if you want to use the language that you were using in the last session, this is your job to be done. It's a functional activity that people are performing that puts them into a big bucket together, right? And then you have a competitive alternative. You have the product category, you have the problem of the competitive alternative, and you have your unique value that you provide. And this is a combination of things like features, benefits, capabilities, business model, all sorts of stuff like that makes you stand out in comparison to the competitive alternative. So I'm going to walk through an example. If we talk about the company Loom, their positioning, if you said, well, who is Loom for? Well, it's for people who are providing regular updates to their coworkers. And what are they using? They're using the tool to do that of having regular meetings, right? Then you say, well, Loom is a screen recording software or screen recorder. And why is it better than having a meeting? Because meetings are really unproductive. Everyone has to say how they're doing, and we get all this small talk, and all of a sudden they're really long and we've wasted all this time. And it's like, couldn't this have just been an email? That's the common phrase, right? And Loom, we're basically saying, well, maybe not an email, but what about a screen recording? We let you record your screen and yourself at the same time, so you can make really, really concise, powerful update videos to send to your coworkers, and you'll drastically cut down the time that you waste in meetings. Effectively, what I've just done is I've said, here's who it's for, here's what it is, and here's why it's better than what you've been using. You could do this with DuckDuckGo. I'll give you one more example, right? DuckDuckGo, it's for people who are searching and browsing the internet. What are they using to do that? They're using web browsers, right? And when we say, well, what's DuckDuckGo? Well, we are also a browser, but unlike other browsers that track you, we don't. It's a completely private experience. And so I've effectively positioned DuckDuckGo, ideally to earn a spot. They know what shelf, it's on the browser shelf, and they know what makes it different and why you would use it, right? You could do it for Slack, you could do it for a bunch. But I'll pause there. Thoughts, comments, anything worth diving into deeper before I keep going?
No, I like it. I'm not sure if you get into different types of positioning. I found that really useful. When different types of position, like whether you're using like an existing product or based on the market. I don't know if you get to that, but that would be interesting to dive into. But no, this is
Yeah.
good. No mentions of increasing revenue yet.
Not yet, no. And they, you'll see, basically the combination of how these things match up determines different different types of positioning. So for example, and I won't go too deep in it yet, we'll come back to it a little bit, but you'll see here in DuckDuckGo, the alternative and your category, when they are the same thing, that is, you're basically competing in a mature market, right? You're more red ocean, whichever way you want to say it, you're positioning yourself. And that has a lot of consequences of choosing that. Versus here, I'm competing in a more immature category, right? I'm bringing screen recorder to this specific job to be done or workflow. People don't really think about it that way, right? People weren't using screen recorders as ways to update their teams. They use screen recorders for different things. So they're like, oh, I never thought about using that. It's an emerging category for this specific workflow. So we'll come back to that, but those constitute definitely different types of positioning. One thing that we always tell people, and I'll use two different examples for this, is that positioning is a long-term bet. It's not a short-term experiment. So me and my friends were in a band, and this is kind of, a silly example, but when we started, we could play lots of different styles of music. We've been making music together for a long time. And so when we started, we said, well, what kind of band do we want to be? One option is that we said we could be do this kind of electronica stuff. There's a cool genre we liked at the time called vaporwave. Make vaporwave music. Another option is a lot of us in the past had been like metal bands, like metal music, Metallica or whoever you want to pick. We could be a metal band. Or we had this idea where maybe we could be a pop punk band like Blink-182 or Green Day or any of those bands. And so at that moment, we said, well, we need to make a decision. So this was a positioning decision. Do we want to make pop punk music for people in their 20s and 30s who like this specific style in the early 2000s? Do we want to make metal music for this group? Do we want to make this vaporwave for this group? And we decided to do the pop punk angle. And we said, let's make some pop punk music. So we put out an EP. It had 3 songs on it. And it probably got streamed 1,000 times on Spotify. And if you know Spotify, you get paid like 0.00005% of a penny for every stream. So 1,000 streams was like $3 or something, maybe $1. You could take that moment and say, oh, we got the positioning wrong. It was a total flop. But in reality, it takes a long time to actually win part of any market. It takes a long time to actualize that positioning. So fast forward, and this is, I want to preface this. We still are not making any money. So this is not bragging. We made a very little amount of money, but if you take 3 years later, we get close to 1 million streams every month. And we have roughly 100,000 people who listen to us on a monthly basis. Did we know that was going to happen 3 years from when we started? No, because positioning is a long-term bet. If we had chosen vaporwave, would we be 10 times the size? Or would we be tiny and still have no fans? It's really hard to know. You can't really A/B test these different positioning strategies because it takes a long time. And you can use the example of software of Calendly. They've effectively been positioning the same way since 2017. They're going for the job to be done based segment of people scheduling meetings, and they're going for the competitive alternative of back and forth emails. And they really didn't, they had that a version where they had phone tag in there as well earlier on. They chopped that off halfway through when they narrowed down the ICP even more. And, from 2017 to 2023, effectively, they were doing the same thing, right? We're still eliminating back and forth emails. We're still going for people scheduling meetings. And that difference was from, 3 million or all the way down from 100K all the way to maybe 250, 270 million last year. So positioning is a long-term bet. Anything there you want to dig into or?
No, great story.
So yeah, I don't know. It's a little silly, but I think it helps make it's silly. You talked about this a lot in your last call, so I won't belabor the point too much. We find that the most important way to segment a market is not necessarily by geography or business model or industry or department. While these are important, the most important way to segment is with the job to be done or the workflow itself. And that's because in B2B, businesses are made up of workers doing work, and they buy software to help them do specific parts of their work, right? So for us, all B2B software is workflow software. And so when you want to segment a market, the most important thing to segment by is the workflow, or in your vernacular from last episode, job to be done. And these things are stuff that show up on a job description, right? You can imagine an account executive for an enterprise, right? Identify, negotiate, and close sales opportunities. You probably already can imagine some software that would really help you do all three of these things, right? Prospect, secure meetings. You can picture which software would help with that workflow. Each of these individual dots and their subpoints make up workflows. Stuff that would land on a calendar, that's all workflows, right? These are things. We're not talking increased revenue. Increased revenue is not a workflow. It's an outcome of jobs to be done. It's an outcome of different workflows. And so what we've discovered is, different jobs to be done based segments, or different workflow based segments, these things, they're all different markets, right? So if you think about, this is what we've called like a workflow map, is if you take a high level workflow like demand gen, traditionally owned by marketing, but doesn't have to be. Demand gen is probably broken up into smaller sub workflows, attracting leads and nurturing and qualifying, which could be even broken up into further sub ones. Running paid ads, publishing content, right? How do we nurture? We're going to send email campaigns, all these types of things, right? So you have different levels, different sizes of workflows. Some can be really long, some can span across multiple different departments, and others can be very, very small. And each of these, like I said, represents a different segment, and companies have built very, very successful businesses going after different sizes. Calendly, we give the example, is really around this workflow of scheduling meetings, right? Whereas someone else like Gainsight is really saying we do everything in customer success. We serve the end-to-end job of customer success. You can use Gainsight for all of it, right? And there's different things that come with the sizes. If I pick all of customer success, I can likely charge a lot more money for Gainsight. Bigger ACV because I'm tackling a bigger part of their day, potentially a bigger part of the department, right? It's end-to-end, but it's going to be a longer sales cycle. More people are going to have to weigh in, get on board. You have a lot of procurement because it's going to be bigger ACV, all that stuff. Usually better suited for sales-led growth. On the flip side, if I'm just snagging one little piece of the workflow with more of a point solution, I can't charge as much, but way faster sales cycle. Potentially, I can do pure product-led growth and no sales people needed at all, right? And this is how you get people like Calendly who say, well, I'm going after the workflow-based segment of people who are scheduling meetings. That workflow, that little itty bitty slice, shows up in a million broader workflows in every department, in every industry that you can imagine. And so you can get something like this. We have 20 million users. Big enterprise software, they don't have 20 million users because there's so many less enterprises that are going to buy the end-to-end thing at the high. So there's trade-offs, right? And on the flip side, you pick a high-level workflow, like someone like Clary, and they say, we do everything you need to run revenue. And so I'm like, oh, interesting. So you support all these sub workflows below? And they're like, well, no, not really. So what ends up happening is when you choose too high level of a workflow, you get confusion. What am I actually going to do in Clary? Right? Kind of a mystery. You challenge the believability of the claim. Will you really let me run paid ads? That's a big part of why we get revenue. Like, well, no, we don't really do that. And then also you can increase the competitive landscape, right? Because like I said, there's software for every single one of these boxes, really deep entrenched competition. And so the higher I go, the more competitors come into the fray that I need to unseat if I'm going to own the whole end-to-end thing. And way more people who need to weigh in to buy it. So we get some stuff like that. Sometimes too, like people will target workflows, multiple different workflows, like Stripe, for example. They have a product that contributes to carbon removal. That's usually owned by corporate social responsibility. They also let you incorporate your startup in Delaware. It's usually owned by a founder. They let you verify user identities, right? Stripe Identity Atlas. These are three completely different unrelated workflows. So they have to position them separately. They have to create different positioning strategies for these separate products. So that's the one option. Or you do what Rippling does. You squish them all together and you create the new category. You say, these typical things, all these little point solutions, they belong in a workforce platform. And so you go out there and you have to position this whole new category. So for us, that's like all like you could say like, this is the most important part of what we've realized from working with so many companies is kind of the impacts of which workflow-based segment you choose. So I'll pause there though. Any thoughts, questions, stuff you want to dive in more?
No, I really like this. This is well polished. It just feels like what you're saying like resonates so deeply. I work with a bunch of startups, and it almost feels like you're connecting the dots that have existed for a while. Startups struggling. Why do people not understand what we do? How do we communicate our message? And I think this is just such a realistic view of looking at it. What are the workflows? What are the functional reasons somebody is going to use your product? To that end, I think you've worked with a bunch of startups. Is this a common issue that you see with startups, i.e. they're trying to solve, the customer success problem, while they're only an itty bitty startup, to use your language? Like, is this a common problem you come across, and if so, how do you get that startup to sort of niche down and go off, position for that one workflow instead?
Yeah, I think now the framing that I shared before, that you're really choosing a bet, I think has helped people understand it more than they were. Because a lot of times when you say, like, do you want to do a more skinny, small workflow, right? Like just this, people get really scared because they're like, oh, I'm lopping off so much of the market. But it's helpful when you have it with this multi-workflow, like the Calendly example. It's like, well, yeah, but if I do a really big, wide one, I'm actually in a way niching further. I'm narrowing the amount of people who could use my product even more by choosing a really big, long workflow. And like we see this happen too, like when companies work with, let's say, design partners. So they partner with some enterprise to build the product. When you get to enterprise level and you're building a product for the enterprise's custom bespoke, giant company-wide workflow, it usually only works for that company. Because if you're 50,000 person company, you partner with them, you build this thing, all of a sudden you're no longer really a product, you're a consulting service that delivers a customized software experience. And then these companies that work with the design partners, they get locked in early. They're like, well, this company's giving us $1 million a year. And then they go to try to sell that to other people. And they're like, well, my enterprise has a completely different process. And all of a sudden they can't scale it because they've built a bespoke solution. In their minds, the ACV clouded them that this is not going to be able to scale. And so it's really level setting of like, what really is a market? Because a market of one is not enough to build a scaling startup, right? Like, even if it's you could argue if you're building something for the US government and it's $1 billion contract, like, okay, fine. You have a market of one and you're $1 billion company, who cares? But most people are not doing that, right? They want to get more customers. And so it's really about figuring out what's the right level, what's the chunk we want to bite off that we think actually will show up time and time again. And honestly, the bigger problem with most companies is more like this, and they're not Stripe, and they are saying, well, we just do like all these different things. Can't we sell them all at once? And they don't realize that if I want to sell carbon removal workflow, incorporation Delaware workflow, and verify user workflow, these are going to be completely different go-to-market strategies, right? These people don't hang out together. They're not in the same Slack groups. They're not comparing software together. It's going to take a bunch more than they can actually bite off. And that's a common problem when the startups are all in one, where they're like, we've taken these 7 different products, we're selling them all in one. And it's like, does anyone buy all 7 of those products? And in reality, it's no, because they belong to 7 different workflows with 7 different departments. And so there isn't really a real consolidation argument if someone really isn't doing all of the things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's for those watching, like, it's very easy to nod your head to this stuff, what you're saying, like I am, and just be like, yeah, it makes sense. But I feel like it's a completely different beast to actually take it seriously and act upon it. Like when I've worked with startups, it often has to get to the point where they're like, okay, yeah, we're really tired of, like, growth being stagnated. Like, we're going to start taking this seriously. I particularly see it appear with venture-backed startups, where I think they struggle to, they're constantly selling the vision to investors.
Yep.
Right, this is how we become $1 billion company, and they really struggle to sort of break that down into the short-term positioning or the short-term product strategy of, starting somewhere small. But no, this is super valuable.
And yeah, to your same point, it's like the show Silicon Valley, right? Like the part where he says, we should go get some revenue. And he's like, no, you want to be pre-revenue. If you're pre-revenue, anything's possible, right? And like founders live in this example where they're like, well, this could be used in these 10 different industries. And it's like, okay, which one do you want to go win first with your one marketing person? And they're like, oh, shoot, I would have to choose. And all of a sudden it becomes this existential crisis and they don't want to do it, right? They're like, it's so much more fun just to live in VC land where the possibilities are so great. We're getting all this money. We bought our office, we got a cool brand and stuff. And it's like, all right, great. Now, which workflow based segment are you going to go win first? And then they're like, oh no. And everything kind of comes apart at the seams.
Yeah, so real.
So, okay, so let me share my screen. So really first part of your target audience is the workflow that they're doing. The second thing, which people often do not include in a target audience, is the competitive alternative. And this has big ramifications for how you actually position. And I can show you why, right? Competitive alternatives, again, don't have to be direct vendors in your category. Like we'll see startups in Y Combinator and they're like, well, there's another startup in Techstars that's doing the same thing as us. They're our competitor. And I'm like, no, they're probably not. A lot of times it can be another product category altogether, right? Slack replaces email. They're positioned against a different product category. Loom replaces meetings. They're positioned against this method. This was a company called Around. They got bought by Miro. They were positioned against an actual vendor in their same category. And then this is a company called User Evidence. We worked with them, former client. And basically they say, don't, go around asking your customers one by one for case studies. So they're positioned against a process of just asking people, this manual process. So competitive alternatives come in different flavors. And so the combination of the workflow, people who are doing cold outreach as an example, using sales engagement tools, that is the non-negotiable part of a market segment. The rest of the stuff, it's kind of like cherry on the top, right? If I have everyone doing cold outreach with sales engagement tools, I can further sub-segment to be like, and I really only want to target people in the EU, and I really only want to target them in insurance, and I really only want to get headcount of this. That type of stuff can be helpful in very specific go-to-market motions. At the level of positioning, it's not always necessary. Sometimes if you just nail these first two, it's really, really powerful. Then we get to product category. And this is like where a lot of stuff really, the shit hits the fan, if I'm allowed to swear. You can bleep that out if you want. But when it comes to the product category, you really have these three options. The first option is you put yourself in a mature, well-known category. And this has benefits, right? If I say I'm an e-signature platform and I say I'm e-signature, I don't need to educate you what an e-signature platform is. Most people know it's a very mature, stable category. So the sales cycles are going to be quicker. People are looking for e-signature. They know what they want. There's a real market because we can look at PandaDoc. We can look at DocuSign. We can look at whoever and know that these are big companies. There's real money to be made. There's a dedicated line item probably for this type of software. Problem, it's going to be more red ocean. We're going to have competition. There's a lot of big players. There's price anchoring sometimes. People expect an e-signature platform to cost a certain amount. There may be negative associations if people are like, oh, I don't want an e-signature. That's so blah, right? Or compliance people hate those. I don't know. And then potentially you could be late to the game with distribution. Like some of the big players will have dedicated long-term relationships with enterprises and you'll have to break in. So the second option is you pick the emerging, usually sexy category, something that's less well-known, is getting VC backing, people are pouring money into it, way less competition, less price anchoring. People don't really know what it should cost because it's new. You don't really have negative associations because people, again, don't really know what it is. You can get a head start on your distribution because the big guys haven't prioritized it yet. It still seems like too small of an opportunity. So you can go out there and start stealing market share before the big incumbents really want to turn their ships towards you. Problem is you're going to have to spend a ton of money on education, way longer sales cycles because you have to explain all this stuff. You're going to be fighting for budget. You're going to try to get them to take their budget from one place, bring it to your new category. And then there's a risk that the category just doesn't materialize. It doesn't happen. Like 3 or 3 years ago, there was a big category called product-led sales. It was getting all this attention. There's companies like Endgame, Pocus, Calixa, and it was like VCs were pouring money into it. And then it just didn't really take. PLG as a practice kind of fell out of favor. It didn't a lot of PLG related stuff was kind of not working. And that was because of all sorts of post ZERP era things like pandemic, hype bubble kind of burst. And all of a sudden we're like, we need salespeople. Let's go close some big deals. So PLS, all these people who spend all this time educating why PLS needs to exist, why you need a PLS platform, suddenly found themselves in a really precarious spot because nobody wanted anything to do with it. And a bunch of the businesses went out of business. Calixa goes out of business, Correlated goes out of business. And then the survivors had to pivot to new things. Endgame doesn't call himself that anymore. Pocus doesn't call himself anymore. So everyone had to flee. So there's risks, right? This is the potentially potentially bigger return, but higher risk. This is like safer, but potentially lower return, right? You might not be a $1 billion company in this one, but you have a higher likelihood of being a 10 million or 15 million or $20 million company, right? It's a little tiny sliver of a chance of being a $1 billion company here, but a high chance of being a nothing dollar company, right? And then the third option is you just make up a name. Like, I don't fit in any category. I'm just making stuff up. We just say, we don't think you should do this. Some people do. We say no. Like, if you have to coin the category, you're in a lot of trouble. Because like almost every category wasn't coined by a specific company. Like the media coined it, or review people coined it. Like Uber and Lyft did not coin the phrase ride sharing. That like had already existed. It was a category that like formed collectively, right? So if you have to name it, yes, I always say that the one benefit, you get to do the really fun splashy LinkedIn post. Check it out, we created a new category. But then everyone makes fun of you. Like when DocuSign said, no, we don't do e-signature anymore. We're intelligent agreement management. And they were just excoriated by all the internet. I'll pause here though, because obviously I just threw a lot more at you.
No, this is really good stuff. We can keep going. I mean, I guess as someone who's recently become a startup founder, will be launching this year. This is also interesting for me. Would you say then it's when entering the market, you should definitely have a category that you can name. Like you should put a label on it. And if you're not doing that, then you are sort of in that danger zone where maybe you're kind of pushing yourself too far to the right.
There's an exception though. There's I think in general, yes. There's an exception if you are doing a really, really specific use case. Like if you think of that, something down here, you don't necessarily need to, because usually if you're coming in trying to slice away by solving a hyper specific pain point, you actually don't need to say a category for a while. And even back to that Calendly example, right? You don't see them ever say a category until, let's see, 2023, right? So they say scheduling automation platform. Up until then, the category is kind of just abstracted away because they're solving such a hyper specific pain point, right? So if you are really doing something narrow, you don't necessarily have to name it or put yourself in an existing one. If you're trying to do something bigger, I think you do. I think you either need to pick one that's emerging or you need to pick one that's mature.
Got it. Makes sense. And just to be clear, so don't force it. You don't have to name a category, but if not, then stick to sort of the workflow side of things. Like name the workflow. Focus on the functional aspect of what you're serving.
Exactly. And like another example would be Zapier, right? Like the way that most people adopted Zapier is they were Googling, I want to integrate Google Drive with Calendly. And then a website popped up that said, click this to integrate the two. And all of a sudden you're in Zapier. You never even saw a category. You just saw the specific workflow. You came in, you clicked it. You're like, wow, this is amazing. And you could abstract and think like, well, this is an automation tool, but they don't actually have to say that anywhere. So it's like, again, solving a hyper-specific use case, workflow, job to be done, whatever you want to call it. Potentially, you don't actually have to say the category. I think it is helpful for you to say it's software versus a service, right? Because sometimes people don't say that and they're like, oh, this is like a cool consulting company. They're like, oh, no, we're actually software, or vice versa. So like at the very least, you wanted to say we're an app or we're a Chrome extension or whatever it might be, just so people know. Last piece, right, was really around this like differentiation. It's like, why are you better? And it's tackling two things. It's the problem of the alternative and then your unique value, usually through features, capabilities, and benefits. So this is a concept that I think people have found helpful. Is really like the flips. If the market looks at a job to be done through the lens of workflows, we look through the lens of a job to be done through a capability of a product. So they're like two sides of the same coin. It's really just which perspective are we describing it? And so, for example, Loom, right, the capability is, what do I do with the product? I can record quick demonstration videos to share with the team. The feature is the technical aspect that makes it possible. And then the benefit is really the outcome it drives, right? So cut down meetings by 29%. Calendly, the shareable calendar link, this lets others book time on your calendar. That's the capability. And really the benefit is the outcome. You eliminate this back and forth coordination. And so when you bring these things together, you can really see there's two ways that you can differentiate as a company. The first one is you say what we call differentiation by degree. We do the same thing as other companies, but just better, faster, cheaper, whatever it might be. Or binary differentiation is we just do something completely different. So differentiation by degree, this is a company called Freckle. We worked with them. They do the same things as Clay, but they have a lower learning curve. So they're saying, well, we do the same as men. So we say it's a degree of difference. On the flip side, binary would be something like Campfire. This is Jason Fried from Basecamp and 37 Signals. He starts this Slack competitor. And the difference is you host it yourself on your own servers and you only pay for it once. So that's a binary differentiation, right? That's like saying, do I want to pay every month and have someone else host Slack? Or do I want to host myself and pay for it one time? There's no overlap of those two things. So it's real binary differentiation that forces people to make a choice. So really, those are the two sides. So once you pull those things together, this is a very loose structure of how you can lay this out on the homepage. Really, it's these, you could say 4 different sections, or how, depending on how you want to break it up, maybe you could say it's 6 sections. But really, this hero section is where you answer those main positioning questions, right? You show me the segmentation, you show me the categorization and the differentiation, right? The 3 things: who is this for, what is this thing, and why is it better? This is another company we worked with called eWebinar. So you can see, run hundreds of engaging webinars without you having to be there. Run webinars, that's the workflow. The differentiation is you don't have to be on them when they're running. And then Melissa, their founder, she calls it an e-webinar. Is actually the category that she's saying. So it's different than a normal webinar. It's a different category. So if you're trying to run webinars the other way, your competitive alternative would be you sitting on every single webinar, actively running them. Now there's this new way you can run hundreds of them. You don't even have to be on it. It's this new category, that type of deal. So this is like where you take the answers to those positioning questions, you put them on the hero. And then the rest of the website is basically making your case. And so we often say people should have a problem section, which is laying out the problems of the alternative way of accomplishing the job to be done. So you're tired of running the same live webinars over and over again, right? You can never run webinars enough to meet people's schedules. Something always goes wrong. You feel burnt out. Then we say you transition to the solution. This is where you re-pitch the differentiation, right? Turn your pre-recorded webinar, this is where we're talking about capabilities and benefits kind of summarized in a statement, pre-recorded video into an automated webinar that actually performs better, right? That's like the unique value you provide. And then we call this next section the 15-second product demo. It's really, what are the individual features, capabilities, and benefits that make the argument believable, that you're actually going to be able to deliver the value you're promising to deliver. And we always say you should show parts of the product. You should show whether they're, cool abstractions or not. That's kind of up to you. But you should be showing people exactly how am I going to do this, because it's going to help them picture the workflow that they're going to use it with. They can imagine sitting down. They can imagine explaining it to the teams. And if you don't ever connect the hoity-toity high-level stuff to like real life work, it becomes really, really difficult for people to internally champion a specific solution to the rest of their company. So I'll pause there. That's basically the end-to-end Fletch process. There's obviously more to it, but in a nutshell, we're trying to help you figure out which bets you want to make, picking a bet, and then really fleshing it out with the supporting aspects. And then we document it on the homepage so everyone can see it. And it doesn't have to be stuffed away in a Google Drive folder somewhere.
No, this was really, really good. For me, the biggest takeaways, just to reiterate again, I think for me, it comes down to 2 words: functionality or functional, and capability. Like that's just going to when you think about your product through that lens or the customer through the other lens, talking about high level business outcomes almost becomes illogical. Like it just doesn't make sense. So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me, and through your content and your partner's content, just, focus on the product capabilities, how that maps to the functional aspect that the customer cares about. And I think that's just going to allow you to get to that level of specificity so people can understand your messaging. So no, this has been really, really helpful. Smash the show and tell format out of the park. I appreciate that.
For sure. And like to your point about business outcomes, sometimes people think, me and Rob, my co-founder, we hate them and stuff. We're like, no, you got to keep these things in perspective, right? Like business outcomes, it's almost like a final step. It's like the final boss in a video game, right? Like if you can earn the champion, who's usually like a director, if you can earn their trust enough to bring in the other stakeholders to make this deal happen, the final boss is that CFO who's like, all right, show me the ROI, and that's where you actually have to deliver like well, here's those last 5 clients that are very similar spot as you. We implemented it, and then after 5 or 6 months, they saw this business outcome go up this side. So it's like you earn the right to talk about business outcomes by first winning over all these other people who are not necessarily thinking about business outcomes in their day-to-day. Like, again, the people who are doing, like, only live in business outcomes, really high-level executives, they're not in the nitty-gritty world of software decisions, right? Like, they are way high level, and they basically say, like, okay, here's our objective. I want you teams to figure out the best way you should reach it. The teams below come to some consensus. We think, we could hire a consultant. Maybe that's one way. Maybe we want to buy this new software. That's another way. They make the case to the higher ups. They say, okay, go out and let's try it. And then they go through the whole process. The people down low start evaluating software. So it's like you have to keep these things, everything, there's the band Radiohead. They have a song, Everything in Its Right Place. That's the point of this, right? Like, your main product positioning is for the champion, the person who's most likely going to be championing you to the rest of the people. And almost never is the champion a C-level executive. It's just not how it works. And so make your positioning to the champion. There's exponentially more directors than there are CEOs. So you've automatically boosted your chances, right? If I'm like, I really would love to land Salesforce as a client. You don't write the website for Mark Benioff, right? You're just not going to get through to him. And there's only one of them. You're like, I couldn't get a hold of Mark. I guess we'll never work with Salesforce. It's like, well, what about the tens of thousands of directors that could potentially start this conversation? Like, why did you just limit it to the one guy who's a multi-billionaire who lives on an island? Like, let's be realistic. So you write it for the right people. Business outcomes have a place, just usually not in the primary product positioning.
Awesome. All right, we can wrap it there. This has been amazing. Thanks, Anthony.
Thanks so much for having me. Super fun.